Slapton Church in Northamptonshire has long been on my bucket list. It is a source of continuing delight that I can get to my late 40s, and there are still treasures that I've yet to see. St Botolph's is a straightforward sort of building from the outside, not particularly grand or stately, a simple rural parish church. But you come here not for the architecture, but for its decoration. It was with much anticipation that I opened the south door of the church and I crept inside. I chuckled with delight as the lights came on and I received my first glimpse of the great prize. For this church is covered in an array of medieval wall paintings dating from the 13th to the 15th century. Like the church, these are not fancy wall paintings, they are vernacular art, images of the saints painted over various centuries to enrich the church walls using simple earth pigments, primarily red and yellow ochre and lamp black. However, in their battered simplicity, they are utterly ravishing. The first painting that comes into view is the massive image of St Christopher. Many times life-size, he is painted on the north wall of the nave and he dominates the interior. Christopher is always painted opposite a medieval church door, as it was the medieval belief that if you viewed the image of the saint, you would be free from sudden accidents and death that day. I could have done with seeing him the day before, as I'd had a bit of an accident in a supermarket car park in Warwick when someone reversed at just the same time as I did. The name Christopher, Christophorus in Greek, means Christ bearer, and the legend is that Christopher was a giant and a servant of the devil, who when he saw the devil tremble before the image of the cross became a Christian. Guided by a hermit, he devoted himself to the good work of carrying people across a river, and on one occasion he was carrying a person who got heavier and heavier with every step, and turning to look upward he saw that it was Christ, and Christopher was carrying the weight of the world, Christ said. So we see here Christopher with his tree trunk staff crossing the river as he looks up to behold Christ seated on his shoulder blessing him. Around Christopher's feet are a wonderfully depicted fish, and beside his right foot a figure of a mermaid. In medieval iconography, the mermaid was a symbol of pride and vanity, and she looks at herself in her mirror as she combs her long hair. On the south wall of the nave are a series of wall paintings of different dates, and they are what is termed a palimpsest, which means there are layers of paint one on top of another, different schemes of wall paintings of different dates. Above the pillar we see a figure of the Virgin Mary, which is part of a 14th century depiction of the weighing of souls on the Day of Judgment. To the left would have been a large figure of St Michael the Archangel, and you can see his red robes and his grey wings, and he had in his hand a pair of weighing scales into which 2 souls had been placed. And you can see the tiny figure of a naked praying soul in the visible pan. What Mary is doing is praying on a set of prayer beads with the aim of tipping the pan and ensuring the salvation of that person's soul. At some point in the 15th century, probably when the St Christopher was painted, this earlier image was whitewashed over, and over the top of the weighing of souls was painted a massive image of St George and the Dragon. This only survives in fragmentary condition. You can see part of the middle of George's armoured figure. By tradition, St George speared the dragon in order to save the daughter of a king, and usually see the king and queen sitting in their royal keep in depictions of the scene. And that is what you can see top right, the towers of their castle. When these paintings were conserved in the 1960s, the decision was taken to sacrifice the lower part of the figure of St George in order to reveal the weighing of souls. Further down this nave arcade, which incidentally dates from the early 13th century, are a series of smaller panels painted on arches and pillars. On the eastern face to the westernmost pillar is a very popular image from the Middle Ages called the Mass of St Gregory. The history of this iconography is rather complex and it deserves a video all of its own. The legend is that St Gregory was celebrating Mass and there was a woman in the congregation who doubted that the host he had consecrated was truly the body of Christ. so it turned miraculously into a bleeding finger. As the Middle Ages progressed, the iconography of this miracle changed, and by the 15th century the bleeding figure had been replaced with the whole body of the crucified Christ appearing on the altar to St Gregory. We see St Gregory, having laid down his rather beehive-looking papal tiara, kneeling at the altar with Christ the Man of Sorrows appearing to him, showing his wounds. This beautiful painting is executed in only two colours, yellow ochre and lamp black, but it is very accomplished. Round the corner from the Gregory Mass is an image of about the same period, and it's a depiction of the ecstasy of St Francis. In 1224, while on Mount Alverna, Francis received a vision of Christ's cross and he received the stigmata. And what we see here is the moment he receives the stigmata with rays from Christ's wounds leading to Francis's hands and feet. And on the respond of the arcade is a much worn painting of the 14th century that now looks like a great splodge of red earth pigment. Look carefully and you can see the outline of the figure of horns. It is an image of the devil, and in front of him are the heads of two women who are in mid-conversation. This is most probably a didactic panel warning of the sin of gossip. If we head now into the south aisle, there are a further series of 14th century paintings. On the south face of the western pillar is a rather chilling image that is virtually the first thing you see as you enter. It is Judas Iscariot hanging himself from a tree, having returned the 30 pieces of silver after betraying Christ. There's not much here but outline, but the yellow ochre splodge next to Judas is probably the devil tempting him to suicide. On the next pillar along is a much happier scene, the Annunciation, with Gabriel saluting the Virgin Mary to tell her that she is to be the Mother of God. The paintings on the south wall of the aisle are rather badly worn, but towards the east end is a very curious scene from the life of a popular medieval saint, St Eloy or St Eligius, the patron saint of metalworkers and blacksmiths. He is shown dressed as a bishop and he's standing in front of an anvil, and before him is a three-legged horse. Now, one of the prominent miracles associated with St Eligius relates that he had to shoe a horse that was possessed by a demon, and to do so without being kicked in the face, he had to cut off one of the horse's legs. He attached the shoe and then put the leg back on again. Above this interesting scene, which may be 13th century, is a 14th century representation of St Anne teaching her daughter, the Virgin Mary, to read. So when you came into the church, the first image you saw was St Christopher, who would protect you from sudden death, but when you left, the last image you saw was to remind you of the reality of mortality, and it was an image of the three living and the three dead. The story goes that three noble men in their finery, one young, one middle-aged and one elderly, were hunting in a wood when they encountered three corpses, who said to them, "I was well fare, such shall you be, and for God's love beware of me." It was a reminder to medieval people who saw this image to reflect on death, to keep God in mind, and to turn to God for salvation. All of these images in faded paint served a purpose. Some of them, like the three living and the three dead and the weighing of souls, underlined the importance of a life of Christian virtue and of the promises of salvation in the face of the realities of mortality. Other images were images of men who had lives of godly virtue, St Christopher, St George, St Eligius and St Gregory, lives to emulate. The Gregory Mass, of course, had an extra dimension in that it was an icon of the importance and value of the Mass and the sacramental doctrine of transubstantiation. The image of St Christopher had a double meaning too. It was an image of Christian heroism, but had an apotropaic purpose too. The belief that St Christopher's image could prevent sudden death was not church doctrine, but a popular lay tradition. And this brings me rather neatly to an important point about these paintings. These images are painted on the walls of the people's part of the church, the nave and the aisles. It's popular to think of the medieval church as oppressive, to think of it as a top-down institution with beliefs that were imposed. But these images spring directly from the devotional life, the religious values and attitudes of the laity of the people of Slapton themselves. The paintings at Slapton are very precious. They give a much weathered insight into something that has been lost from most medieval churches, colour and iconography. Even the humblest church buildings such as this were enriched with dazzling schemes of iconography that taught the Catholic faith and encouraged the faithful. Those who worshipped in these churches in the 14th and 15th century, the church militant on earth, were surrounded in their worship by images of the church triumphant in heaven. What a joy it was to see these precious survivals, and I do recommend you visit if you can. As I left Slapton Church, the rain was just beginning to gently pour, and as I walked around the outside, it was wonderful to hear the May song of the birds. Thanks for watching.